The fog came in low across the Moselle Valley that morning, thick as wool and cold enough to make a man's bones ache. Staff Sergeant Raymond Clarke stood in the gunner's position of his M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, watching the gray world materialize around him like something half-remembered from a dream. 26 years old, Pittsburgh-born, and 3 months into his second tour in the European theater. He had learned to read morning fog the way other men read newspapers, looking for what it revealed and what it concealed. Behind him, the rest of the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion C Company was dispersed along the ridgeline in a defensive arc that command had assured them would never see action. The German counter-offensive in the Ardennes had been contained, they said. The Wehrmacht was finished, they said. All that remained was the slow, grinding push toward the Rhine, and the 614th, one of only 2 black tank destroyer battalions in the entire U.S. Army, would stay exactly where they were, guarding a supply route that nobody expected the enemy to threaten. Raymond had stopped believing what command said around the same time he stopped expecting to be treated like the soldier he'd trained to become. The 614th was good, probably better than half the white TD battalions he'd seen. But that didn't matter to the officers who rotated through their ranks or the supply sergeants who always seemed to find reasons why their requisitions came up short. And what mattered was the color of their skin and the unspoken assumption that black soldiers were best kept away from the real fighting. Useful for labor battalions and quartermaster duties, but not to be trusted with the sharp end of the spear. He flexed his fingers inside his gloves, feeling the familiar contours of the M18's gun controls. The Hellcat was a beautiful machine in its way-fast, agile, open-topped, mounting a 76mm gun that could punch through German armor at reasonable range. Light armor, no turret roof, which meant you lived or died by speed and surprise. Raymond had named his Mississippi Gamble after the river of his father's birth and the risk his parents had taken coming north during the Great Migration. The name was painted in neat white letters on the hull, along with a pair of dice showing snake eyes. His crew thought it was about luck. Raymond knew better. Snake eyes meant you'd lost everything but still had to play the next hand. Private First Class Elijah Eli Washington was loading shells in the cramped interior below, working with the methodical precision that made him the best loader Raymond had ever seen. Eli was 19, from Alabama, slight and quick with hands that never seemed to stop moving. Corporal Marcus Bulldog Thompson handled the driving. A Detroit native with arms like fence posts and a face that rarely showed emotion, Private James Jimmy Lee occupied the assistant gunner position. From Philadelphia, college-educated, always reading, always questioning. They'd been together since Fort Hood, trained together through the dusty Texas heat, shipped overseas together on a transport that kept them segregated below decks while white soldiers got the better berths. They were a crew. They trusted each other with their lives because they had to, because nobody else was going to look out for them. Sergeant, Jimmy's voice came soft through the headset. Movement in the tree line. 2 o'clock. Could be shadows. Raymond swung his optics toward the indicated position. The fog was lifting now, revealing the patchwork of dormant farmland and scattered woodlots that characterized this part of France. For a moment he saw nothing. Then a flicker of motion that didn't match the wind. Too deliberate. Too low to the ground. "I see it," he said. "Could be local farmers. Could be our own people on patrol." But it wasn't. He knew it in his gut the way you knew things in combat, that animal instinct that had kept him alive through North Africa and Sicily and now here, in the frozen February earth of eastern France. The way the movement came in stuttered bursts. The way it stopped too precisely. The way the fog seemed to part just wrong. Then the radio crackled, Lieutenant Harrison's voice cutting through with unusual urgency. "All C Company positions. Be advised. Intelligence reports possible enemy armor movement in Sector 7-9er. All units maintain defensive positions and report any contact. Do not, repeat, do not engage without authorization." Harrison out. Raymond felt his jaw tighten. Do not engage without authorization. That was the 614th's war in a nutshell. See the enemy. Report the enemy. Wait for white officers to decide if black soldiers were competent enough to do their jobs. You hear that? Bulldog's voice rumbled through the intercom. "I heard it. Possible enemy armor," Jimmy said. "In our sector. And we're supposed to just watch." That's what the man said. The movement in the tree line intensified. Now Raymond could make out distinct shapes, low, angular, the unmistakable profiles of armor. His breath caught. Panthers. Panzer Mark V Panthers, the Germans' best tank, mounting a 75mm gun that could kill a Sherman at 1,000 yards and armor that could shrug off most American rounds. And not just one. He counted 6, then 8, then stopped counting because they kept coming, emerging from the fog like prehistoric creatures, their mottled camouflage making them ghosts against the winter landscape. Jesus Christ, Eli breathed. That's a whole company more, Raymond said. His mind was racing now, calculating angles and distances. The Panthers were moving in a staggered column along the valley floor, using the terrain for cover, clearly heading for the supply route behind the American lines. They hadn't spotted the 614th's positions yet. The Hellcats were hull down on the ridge, camouflaged, nearly invisible. But the moment the Panzers reached the gap in the American defenses 2 miles south, they'd have a clean run at the supply columns, the artillery parks, the field hospitals. Hundreds of American soldiers would die, and the German breakthrough would cut off 3 divisions trying to advance toward the Saar. Raymond keyed his radio. Sabre 6, this is Gamble 1. I have visual confirmation of hostile armor. Count at least 14 Panzers, Type Panther, moving southeast along Route Whiskey. They're heading for the gap. Over. Static. Then Lieutenant Harrison's voice, tight with stress. Gamble 1, maintain position and continue observation. I'm forwarding your report to battalion. Do not engage. Acknowledge. Over. Sabre 6, if we don't engage now, they'll be through the gap in 15 minutes. We have good firing positions. Request permission to negative Gamble 1. I said maintain position. You'll receive orders when I have them. Harrison out. Raymond stared at the advancing Panzers. 14 German tanks, moving with the confidence of a force that knew it had achieved surprise. In his mind, he could already see what would happen, the desperate radio calls for air. Support that wouldn't arrive because of the weather, the frantic scrambling of units trying to reposition. The carnage when those Panthers hit the soft targets in the American rear. He could see it because he'd seen it before in Tunisia when hesitation and bad decisions had cost lives that didn't need to be lost. Sarge? Eli's voice was young, uncertain. What do we do? What did they do? Follow orders and watch Americans die while black soldiers proved they could be counted on to do nothing? Or take the shot, stop the breakthrough, and face whatever consequences came from a black sergeant who dared to think for himself? The Panthers were passing through optimal firing range now. The M18 76mm gun could penetrate their side armor at this distance if he picked his shots right. The Hellcat's speed would let him reposition between kills. He had a clear field of fire and every tactical advantage except one permission. They didn't give us permission because they don't think we can do the job, Jimmy said quietly. They think we'll panic, miswaste ammunition, get ourselves killed, or maybe they just think we should know our place, Bulldog added. Raymond's hands tightened on the gun controls. His father's voice echoed in his memory. That last conversation before Raymond shipped out, "You're going to have to be twice as good to get half the credit, son. And even then, they'll find a way to say you did something wrong. But you do the right thing anyway. You do your duty. You be the man you know you are, and to hell with what they think." Load HVAP, Raymond said. High-velocity armor piercing. The good rounds, the ones that could punch through Panther armor if you hit the right spot. Sergeant? Eli's voice was uncertain. You heard me. Load it. We'll catch hell for this, Jimmy said. We'll catch hell for letting them through, too. At least this way we save some lives first. Raymond activated the company net. All Gamble units. This is Gamble 1. Target priority is the hostile armor in the valley. We're weapons free. Take your shots on my command. Aim for side armor and engine decks. Make every round count. The radio erupted. Gamble 1, this is Sabre 6. You do not have authorization to. Raymond switched frequencies. Gamble 2, you have the eastern column. Gamble 3, western group. Gamble 4, stand by for movers. I'll take lead and center. Across the ridgeline. He could imagine the other Hellcat commanders making their calculations, weighing orders against necessity. They were all black men who'd spent their lives navigating the razor's edge between compliance and conscience. Gamble 1, this is Gamble 2. That was Sergeant Troy Mitchell, a Louisiana man with a droll sense of humor and steel nerves. I have good targeting solutions. Ready on your mark. Gamble 3, good copy. Single quotes Sergeant David Preacher Williams, who actually had been studying for the ministry before the war. Gamble 4, standing by. Sergeant Albert Coleman, the quietest man in the battalion with more confirmed kills than anyone else. Raymond centered his sights on the lead Panther. The fog had lifted enough to give him a clear view of its profile, the long 75mm gun, the sloped frontal armor, the vulnerable side plates and engine compartment. The commander's hatch was open, a German tank officer visible in silhouette, scanning the landscape with binoculars. They still hadn't spotted the Americans. Range 1,100 yards, Jimmy called. Wind negligible. Good firing solution. Raymond took a breath. This was the moment. Everything balanced on what happened in the next seconds. His career, maybe his freedom, certainly his future in this man's army, but also the lives of everyone in those supply columns. Every wounded soldier in those field hospitals, every artilleryman who'd be defenseless when the panzers rolled through. No choice. There had never been a choice. Fire. The 76mm gun roared, the Hellcat rocking backward with the recoil. Raymond watched the tracer arc through the cold morning air, watched it strike the lead Panther just behind the turret ring where side armor was thinnest. The German tank shuddered, smoke venting from the hit. Not a kill, not yet, but a solid impact. Hit! No penetration, Jimmy called. Just 2 mils, right, up 1. Reload, Raymond snapped. Up, Eli confirmed. The German column had stopped, confused, looking for the source of fire. Raymond put his second round into the wounded Panther's engine deck. This time the result was immediate, a gout of flames, smoke pouring from the grills, the tank lurching to a halt as the crew began evacuating. 1 down. Traverse left, next target. The valley exploded into action. The other Hellcats had opened fire now, their 76mm guns speaking in a ragged chorus. Raymond saw a Panther at the rear of the column take a hit from Gamble 3, its track flying off in pieces. Another staggered as Gamble 2's round found its ammunition storage, the resulting explosion spectacular even in daylight. But the Germans were responding now, turrets traversing, searching for their attackers. A Panther fired, the muzzle blast enormous. The round passed overhead with a sound like tearing canvas, impacting somewhere behind the ridgeline. "They're looking for us," Bulldog said, unnecessary but nervous. "Then we don't stay still. Stand by to move." Raymond fired again, missed clean as the Panther lurched forward. Cursed. Fired again. This time he hit the glacis plate, the round deflecting but cracking the weld. The Panther slewed sideways, its driver panicking. Move, move, move. Bulldog had the Hellcat rolling before the command finished. The tank destroyer's powerful engine gunning them backward over the ridge into a new position 30 yards south. The Germans put 3 rounds into their previous location, high explosive and armor-piercing, pulverizing the earth where they'd been. From the new position, Raymond had a better angle on the stalled panzers. He took his time, letting the ranging data crystallize in his mind, feeling the weapon as an extension of his will. Fire. The round took a Panther in the turret side, penetrating, the tank erupting in flames. Fire again. Another hit, this one on a Panther trying to reverse, striking the thin rear armor and turning the interior into an inferno. 4 down, Jimmy was counting. 5. 6. The battlefield was chaos now. Burning tanks, smoke, German crews evacuating under fire, Panthers attempting to maneuver and finding themselves silhouetted against their own burning comrades. The 614th had achieved perfect surprise and was exploiting it with savage efficiency. Raymond worked mechanically, target to target, shot to shot. A Panther emerging from behind cover fire hit the suspension, immobilize it. Another trying to climb the ridge to get a better firing angle fire, catch it on the slope where its belly armor was exposed. Another. Eli was loading without pause. Jimmy was calling corrections. Bulldog was moving them between shots, always 1 step ahead of German return fire. The training had taken over. The endless hours on the gunnery range. The drills they'd run until they could do them in their sleep. The coordination built through repetition and trust. This was what they'd trained for, what they'd been told they weren't good enough to do. Sabre 6 is screaming on the radio, Jimmy reported. Wants us to cease fire. Can't hear him, Raymond said. Radio must be malfunctioning. He fired again. 7 down. A Panther had finally gotten organized, its commander rallying his crew. The German gun swung toward Gamble 2's position. Raymond saw it, saw what was about to happen. Gamble 2, relocate now. Too late. The Panther fired. The round hit Gamble 2 dead center, the explosion catastrophic. The Hellcat's ammunition cooked off in a secondary blast that sent pieces of the tank destroyer 50 feet into the air. No way anyone survived that. Raymond felt the familiar cold rage settle over him, the combat calm that pushed emotion aside and left only purpose. He centered his sights on the Panther that had killed Mitchell and his crew. Fired. The round took the German tank in the turret front, a nearly impossible shot but perfectly placed. The Panther's gun tube sagged, its turret ring shattered. 8. The German column was breaking now, the survivors trying to reverse, trying to escape back into the fog and trees. Raymond tracked them relentlessly. A Panther backing up, trying to put distance between itself and the kill zone fire, hit it in the engine. Another attempting to use smoke for cover fire through the smoke, catch it as it thought it was safe. a third turning broadside in panic fire straight through the side armor into the crew compartment. 11, 12, 13, the last Panther was running now, its commander having abandoned any pretense of fighting. It crashed through the brush at the valley's edge, desperate for the cover of the forest. Raymond tracked it carefully, leading it, accounting for movement and distance. Fired. The round struck just as the Panther reached the tree line, penetrating the rear armor, the tank coasting another 20 yards before grinding to a halt, smoke pouring from every hatch. 14, Jimmy said, his voice hollow. All hostile armor destroyed or disabled. Raymond stared at the burning valley. 14 German tanks in. He checked his watch. 19 minutes. The math was impossible, the kind of thing that happened in propaganda films, not real combat. But there it was, laid out before him in burning steel and dead men. The radio was alive now with transmissions. Lieutenant Harrison shouting for status reports. Battalion command demanding to know what had happened. Other units asking if they should advance, fall back, hold position. Through it all, Raymond sat motionless, feeling the adrenaline beginning to ebb, the shakes starting in his hands. "We did it," Eli said. "We actually did it." "Mitchell's dead," Bulldog said flatly. "His whole crew. They'd all be dead if we hadn't fired," Raymond said. "Every man in those supply columns. Every wounded soldier in the hospitals. They'd all be dead or captured, and the German breakthrough would have worked." "You think the brass is going to see it that way?" Jimmy asked. Raymond didn't answer. He was watching the valley, watching for movement, making sure no German crews were trying to salvage weapons or radios. Professional habits, the things that kept you alive. But in the back of his mind, a different calculation was running. He disobeyed a direct order, engaged without authorization, taking command authority that didn't belong to him. And he'd done it while black, which meant every white officer who'd ever resented the 614th's existence now had ammunition. "Gamble 1, this is Sabre 6. Lieutenant Harrison's voice was cold. "Report to Battalion CP immediately." "And I mean immediately, Sergeant." "Do you copy?" "Copy, Sabre 6. On my way." Raymond climbed out of the Hellcat, his legs stiff, his uniform soaked with sweat despite the cold. Around him, the other Hellcats were emerging from their positions, their crews silent, looking at the burning German armor with expressions that mixed triumph and dread. Preacher Williams walked over, his dark face grave. "That was something, Ray. That was really something. Mitchell's gone, I know. But you saved a lot of lives today. Don't forget that. Don't think the LT is going to care about that right now." "No, probably not." Preacher clasped his shoulder. "But we know. The whole company knows. You did what needed doing." The battalion command post was a commandeered farmhouse 2 miles behind the lines. Sandbagged and camouflaged, busy with staff officers and radiomen. Raymond walked in, still wearing his combat gear, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash, his mind still replaying the engagement. Lieutenant Harrison met him at the entrance. Harrison was 23, a South Carolina native who'd graduated from the Citadel, blonde and clean-shaven and everything the Army thought an officer should look like. He'd been assigned to the 614th 3 weeks ago and had made it clear from day one that he considered it a punishment detail. Inside. Now, the briefing room held half a dozen officers, Captain Whitmore, the company commander, Major Strickland from Battalion S3, 2 captains Raymond didn't recognize who looked like they'd come from division, and a bird colonel whose insignia marked him as from the 7th Corps headquarters. Raymond snapped to attention, saluted. "Staff Sergeant Clarke, reporting as ordered, sir." "At ease, Sergeant." That was Colonel Patterson, the man from Corps. His face was unreadable, the weathered features of a career officer who'd seen too much to be easily impressed. "You want to tell me what happened out there?" Raymond kept his eyes fixed on a point on the wall above the colonel's head. "Sir, at approximately 0-7-15, my position identified 14 hostile tanks, Type Panther, moving toward the gap in our defensive line. I reported the contact to Lieutenant Harrison and requested permission to engage. Permission was denied with instructions to maintain observation only. I assessed that the hostile armor would reach the undefended gap within 15 minutes and would inflict catastrophic casualties on American units in the rear area. I made the tactical decision to engage the hostile column before they could reach the gap." "The tactical decision," Major Strickland said. "You made the tactical decision. You're a staff sergeant, Clarke. You don't make tactical decisions. You follow orders. Sir, with respect, I am a tank destroyer section leader. My job is to destroy enemy tanks. The enemy tanks were there. I destroyed them." "You disobeyed a direct order," Harrison said. His voice was shaking slightly, either with anger or something else. "I explicitly ordered you to hold fire. Sir, if I'd held fire, those Panthers would have broken through." Hundreds of Americans would have died. You don't know that, Strickland said. You don't know what other units were being positioned, what artillery was available, what the overall situation was. That's why we have a chain of command, Sergeant. That's why officers make decisions and enlisted men follow them. Raymond said nothing. What could he say? That he'd known with absolute certainty that no help was coming in time. That he'd been in the Army long enough to recognize the paralysis that gripped white officers when they faced unexpected situations. That he'd trusted his own judgment over the judgment of men who'd spent more time worrying about his skin color than his competence. Colonel Patterson was studying him with an expression Raymond couldn't read. How many confirmed kills, Sergeant? 14, sir. All Panthers. Engagement duration approximately 19 minutes. 19 minutes, Patterson repeated. 14 Panthers in 19 minutes. With how many tank destroyers? 4, sir. We lost 1 vehicle and crew during the engagement. So 4 M18s. 14 Panthers. Under 20 minutes. Patterson looked at Strickland. When was the last time any American unit achieved that kind of kill ratio? That's not the point, sir, Strickland said. The point is discipline. The point is following orders. If every NCO in this army decided to just do whatever he thought was best, then we might win this war faster, Patterson said. Or we might have chaos. That's the question, isn't it? He turned back to Raymond. What made you think you could take 14 tanks, Sergeant? Sir, we had good positioning, good cover, and the element of surprise. The enemy was moving in column formation through restricted terrain. They were vulnerable. And we trained constantly on gunnery and crew coordination. The 614th has some of the best scores in the theater. Does it now? Patterson's tone was dry. I'll have to look into that. Though I suspect those scores don't always make it into the official reports. He pulled out a folder, flipped through papers. It says here you saw action in North Africa, Sicily. You were at Kasserine Pass. Yes, sir. That was a clusterfuck. American armor got torn apart because nobody understood what they were up against and nobody was willing to make decisions fast enough to matter. Patterson closed the folder. It seemed like you learned from that. Sir, I learned that hesitation kills. And I learned that sometimes you have to trust your own eyes and your own judgment even when everyone else is telling you to wait. The room went very quiet. Raymond realized he'd said too much, let too much truth slip out. You didn't tell white officers that you'd stopped trusting their judgment. You didn't imply that their failures had taught you to rely on yourself. Those were thoughts you kept locked away, shared only with other black soldiers who understood. Captain Whitmore cleared his throat. Colonel, with all due respect, this is a disciplinary matter for the 614th. Sergeant Clarke violated direct orders from his platoon leader. That requires consequences, regardless of the tactical outcome. I'm aware of what it requires. Captain, Patterson's voice had gone cold. I'm also aware that Sergeant Clarke's actions probably prevented a German breakthrough that would have cost us hundreds of casualties, and derailed the 7th Corps advance for at least a week. I'm aware that his gunnery skills are apparently exceptional and that his tactical assessment was correct. And I'm aware that if he were a white sergeant in a white unit, we'd probably be writing him up for a medal right now instead of discussing charges. The silence that followed was absolute. No one looked at anyone else. Raymond kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, barely breathing. Patterson stood. Here's what's going to happen. Sergeant Clarke, you're confined to barracks pending a formal investigation into your actions. That investigation will determine whether you'll face court-martial for disobeying orders or whether your actions will be deemed justified by circumstances. In the meantime, you're stripped of leadership duties. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The rest of you, I want full after-action reports from everyone involved. I want assessments of the 614th's training and capabilities. And I want recommendations on how to prevent this kind of situation from arising again. He paused. Though I'll note that the best way to prevent it would be to stop issuing stupid orders to competent NCOs, but I doubt that'll make it into your reports. He walked out. The other officers filed after him, leaving Raymond alone with Harrison. The lieutenant stared at him for a long moment. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. You made me look like a fool, Sergeant. No, sir. I made a tactical decision based on the situation on the ground. You undermined my authority. You ignored my orders. You went behind my back and convinced other section leaders to do the same. Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping. You people need to understand something. The Army has rules, it has structure, and your only job is to follow those rules and fit into that structure. You don't get to decide when orders apply to you and when they don't. Raymond met his eyes. Sir, permission to speak freely? Denied. You're dismissed, Sergeant. Go to barracks and stay there until you're called for. Raymond saluted. Turned, walked out into the cold afternoon air. His hands had stopped shaking, but something else had started. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had nothing to do with the battle and everything to do with the fight that came after. The 614th bivouac area was alive with nervous energy when he returned. Word had spread fast. The engagement, the kills, the aftermath. Men clustered in small groups, talking in low voices, falling silent when they saw him. Preacher, Bulldog, and Jimmy were waiting by Mississippi Gamble. Eli was sitting on the hull, his young face troubled. "They gonna court-martial you?" Bulldog asked. "Don't know yet. Investigation pending." "That's bullshit," Eli said. "You saved lives. You did your job. You did it better than any of them could have." "Doesn't matter what I did," Raymond said. He sat down heavily on an ammunition crate, suddenly aware of how tired he was. "Matters what they can prove I did wrong. They're gonna reload you," Jimmy said. "They can't stand that we showed them up. They can't stand that black soldiers did what white soldiers couldn't. So they'll make an example of you." "Maybe. No, maybe about it." Preacher shook his head. "I've seen this before. We do good, they find a way to make it bad. We save lives, they ask why we didn't save more. We win battles, they say we were reckless or lucky or didn't follow proper procedure." Raymond knew he was right. He'd seen it too, over and over. Black soldiers performing flawlessly and receiving criticism for minor infractions. Black units achieving objectives and being told they'd somehow done it wrong. The 92nd Infantry Division in Italy, constantly derided in the press despite fighting in impossible terrain against fortified positions. The 761st Tank Battalion, which would later be called Patton's Bastards, but was currently being held back from the line because someone decided they needed more training. His own 614th. Consistently achieving high readiness scores and being assigned to re-area guard duty while white. Units with worse records got the glory missions. "I knew the cost when I gave the order," Raymond said quietly. "I knew they'd come after me. But I couldn't—" He stopped, swallowed. "I couldn't just watch. Couldn't just let it happen. Mitchell died doing what I asked. His crew, they trusted me. And hundreds of other men are alive because we fired." "That has to mean something. It means everything," Preacher said, "to us, to the men who would have died. Maybe it means nothing to the brass, but it means everything to the people who matter." They sat in silence for a while, watching the winter sun sink toward the horizon. Somewhere in the valley, German and American Graves registration units would be working through the burned-out tanks, recovering bodies, processing the dead with the grim efficiency that war demanded. Mitchell and his crew would be among them, added to the long list of men who'd given everything in a war that many of them had to fight twice, once against the Germans, once against their own country's assumptions about what they were worth. The investigation took 3 days. During that time, Raymond remained confined to the bivouac area, not quite under arrest, but not quite free. Officers came and went, asking questions, taking statements. The rest of the 614th went about their duties with a kind of quiet intensity, everyone aware that something larger than one engagement was being decided. On the 3rd day, Raymond was called back to battalion headquarters. This time, Colonel Patterson was alone, sitting behind a field desk covered with papers and maps. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, Sergeant." Raymond sat, his back straight, his face carefully neutral. Patterson studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I've completed my investigation, interviewed everyone involved, reviewed the tactical situation, consulted with my staff, and I've made my recommendation to division." Raymond waited. His heart was hammering, but he kept his breathing steady, his expression unchanged. "The facts are clear. You disobeyed a direct order from your platoon leader. You engaged enemy forces without authorization. You took command authority that was not delegated to you. Under a strict interpretation of regulations, that's grounds for court-martial." Patterson paused. "The facts are also clear that your tactical assessment was correct. Your actions prevented a German breakthrough, and you achieved an extraordinary kill ratio against superior enemy armor, under a common-sense interpretation of combat realities. You deserve a commendation, sir. Unfortunately, the Army doesn't always operate on common sense. It operates on rules, regulations, and politics. And the political reality is that there are officers at division and corps who are very uncomfortable with the idea that a black NCO might have shown better judgment than a white lieutenant. There are people who think the 614th got lucky and shouldn't be trusted with independent action. There are people who think the best thing for Army discipline is to make an example of you." Raymond felt something cold settle in his stomach. "However," Patterson continued, "there are also officers, including me, who think that punishing initiative and tactical excellence sends exactly the wrong message, who think that the Army needs soldiers who can think and act decisively regardless of their skin color, who think that winning this war matters more than protecting egos and maintaining social hierarchies." He opened a folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, My recommendation is as follows: no court-martial, no formal charges. Instead, you'll receive a letter of reprimand for failing to follow proper communication protocols with your platoon leader. That letter will go in your file and will probably prevent you from being promoted again during your service. Consider that the price of your initiative. Raymond exhaled slowly. A letter of reprimand was serious, would follow him for the rest of his military career, but it wasn't a court-martial, wasn't a dishonorable discharge, wasn't prison. In addition, Patterson said, I'm recommending the entire 614th for a unit citation for actions on February 18th. And I'm recommending you personally for the Bronze Star with Valor device. Raymond's head snapped up. Sir, you heard me. You destroyed 14 enemy tanks in 19 minutes, prevented a breakthrough, and saved American lives. That deserves recognition. Patterson's expression was grim. Whether division approves those recommendations is another question. There are people who don't think black units should receive citations, who don't think black soldiers deserve valor awards. I'm going to fight for it anyway, but I want you to understand that approval is not guaranteed. I understand, sir. Do you? Do you understand that even if everything I've recommended is approved, you'll still be punished for doing the right thing? That your career is effectively over? That you'll never get the recognition you've earned? That the system you serve so well is going to grind you down and spit you out? Raymond met his eyes. Sir, I understood that before I fired the first shot. I've understood it every day of my life. Being black in America means knowing that doing twice as good will get you half as far. It means knowing that excellence isn't enough, that perfection isn't enough. That even when you do everything right, someone will find a way to say you did it wrong. And then why do it? Why serve? Why keep fighting? Because the job still needs doing. Because men's lives still matter. Because somebody has to show them that we're just as good, just as brave, just as competent as anyone else wearing this uniform. Raymond paused. And because I believe, maybe I'm a fool for it, but I believe that someday, maybe not in my lifetime, but someday it'll actually matter. That someone will look back and see what we did and understand what it cost. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, came around the desk, and extended his hand. For what it's worth, Sergeant Clarke, I think you're one of the finest soldiers I've served with. This army is poorer for how it's treated you and men like you. And I'm sorry I can't do more. Raymond shook his hand. You did what you could, sir. That's more than most. The letter of reprimand came through 2 weeks later, along with official notification that the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion had received a meritorious unit commendation for actions in February 1945. The Bronze Star recommendation disappeared into the bureaucratic void, never to be heard from again. Raymond returned to duty as a section leader, though everyone understood he'd never be promoted again, never be given the opportunities his skills deserved. The 614th continued its advance into Germany, fighting through the Siegfried Line and eventually to the Rhine, performing with distinction and receiving minimal recognition. Lieutenant Harrison was transferred to another battalion a month later. Rumor had it that Colonel Patterson had made it clear Harrison's career advancement would be limited if he stayed where he was. Raymond never learned if the rumor was true. The war in Europe ended in May. Raymond Clarke, having survived North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany, having destroyed more enemy armor than most tank destroyers' crews saw in their entire service, having saved countless American lives through his skill and courage, sailed home with his Bronze Star recommendation still pending and a letter of reprimand in his personnel file. He mustered out in October 1945, returned to Pittsburgh, and went back to the steel mill where he'd worked before the war. He married, raised 3 children, worked 40 years in the mills, and rarely spoke about his service. The 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion was deactivated and largely forgotten. The official histories of the war in Europe mention black units in passing, if at all. The extraordinary actions of February 18th appeared in no accounts, no memoirs, no scholarly works. But the men of the 614th remembered. They remembered Mississippi Gamble and the Burning Valley and the 19 minutes when a black sergeant showed the world what excellence looked like, even when the world refused to see. And Raymond Clarke, working his shifts in the mills, raising his family, living his quiet life, carried with him the knowledge of what he'd done and what it had cost. He carried the weight of Mitchell and his crew, the weight of all the men he'd saved, the weight of a system that had demanded everything from him and given him nothing in return. He carried it with dignity. He carried it with pride. He carried it with the unbreakable strength of a man who knew his own worth, regardless of whether anyone else acknowledged it. And on the rare occasions when his children asked about the war, about the medals he didn't have and the recognition that never came, he would smile in a way that was both sad and fierce and tell them the only thing that mattered. I did my duty. I saved lives. I was a good soldier. Everything else is just noise.